Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today let's make a log cabin quilt. And I mean a log cabin quilt, as in one very big log cabin block. So the quilt is going to be one very big log cabin, and I'm going to be using 4 packages of jelly rolls, 2 of the light, 2 of the dark. Each of these jelly rolls does hold 20 strips of fabric, so I have a total of 40 light and 40 dark. Before I do any sewing and any cutting, I'm going to take all of my jelly roll strips and iron them open and flat. If it comes in a package where you have a fold, be sure to press that fold out. So I want all of my pieces nice and flat to start off with. I'll put a link in the description to the diagram that I'm going to be using. The diagram is one very large log cabin, and on each of the arms of the log cabin, I have the sizes written of what the pieces need to be cut at. For example, 52.5 inches is the cut size, not the finished size. And you're going to be able to see as you go along how this is going to work out, but the measurements are going to be helpful. You can stop anywhere in the pattern or go right to the end. The largest size is a queen size. If you're going to do it right to the queen size, you're going to need at least 6 yards of each, the dark and the light. So if you're going to use the jelly rolls, you're just going to have to make sure that the fabric will equal 6 yards out of your jelly rolls. So this is just going to give you a good reference to be able to go back to. The jelly rolls that I'm using today are from Timeless Treasures, and they're called Tonga Treats. At the beginning of the log cabin, you're going to be able to just cut the fabrics as needed. But as you get larger, the strips are so big, you're going to have to join strips together. Because I need to join them together, I'm going to keep the fabrics together. I have 2 packs, so I know I will have 2 strips of each color. So I'm going to keep them together as I start pressing. You can also line up your fabrics so that you can have a color arrangement that you like, or you can start from a light and go to the dark. As I press those long strips, I want to make sure that I'm not distorting them, and I'm keeping them as straight as possible without stretching them with the heat of the iron. I'm going to start with 2 strips of fabric, and I'm going to use the same color, and they need to be cut at 20.5 inches. The 2 long strips are going to go side by side. You can lay them out a little bit first before you start to bring them to the machine, just to give you an idea on how the layout is going to go. I'm going to have the 2 long strips together first. From there, I'm going to sew going all the way around, just like you would a normal log cabin. So the first piece is going to go up at the top. All the width measurements are going to be the same, always at 2.5 inches. It's only the length that's going to change. So this top piece is going to be the 2.5 inch strip, and it's going to be cut at 4.5 inches. Be sure to trim off those selvages as you go along, because they do act different than the rest of the fabric. I have the 4.5 inch strip cut. The next strip is 22.5 inches. And that will be the first side of the dark going along. You're going to find as you're cutting these, you're not going to have enough of one strip to do the sides. So I'm going to start sewing the strips together. I have my 2 together, then the end, the next long piece, then I'll go to this piece. This piece will now start the light. I'm going to do 2 with the dark, 2 with the light. This is just the centerpiece. So it doesn't really matter what fabric you put in the center. From here on, we're going to have 2 always of dark and 2 always of light. The next light piece is going to be cut at 6.5 inches. To continue going around the block, I need another long strip, but it will be the light. It's cut at 24.5 inches. The math is going to be very easy to follow in this type of a pattern. We're going to start with that 4.5 inches. We add 2 inches to the other side, which is 6.5. When we go to this side, it's going to be 8.5. This side is going to be 10.5. You're always adding 2 inches on each side. So the top and bottom, we add the 2 inches. We also will do the same for the sides. This strip is 22.5 inches. This side is going to be 24.5. The next side is going to be 26.5, which will make this 28.5. So from each side, we're just going to add 2 and 2, 2 and 2. Let's get this little bit here sewn together, and then we can continue to do the cutting. I'm going to start and sew those first 2 center strips together first. This is the only strip that I'm going to press. And I'm going to press those seams open and flat. Because this is the centerpiece, I want it to look like a flat piece so that the side doesn't belong to any side. The next is this top piece. Put right sides together and bring it to the machine and stitch that 1/4 inch. With the pieces cut the exact size, we don't need to do any trimming. And that's going to keep everything straight. From here, all of the seams are going to be pressed out. And I'm only going to hand press. So I'm going to fold that back with my hand and just run my finger along that seam. It's the heat and the steam of the iron that can distort very long, thin pieces like these jelly rolls. Because I'm always sewing on the right-hand side of the sewing machine, I'm going to always pick up the right-hand fabric. So as I go along, it's always going to be on the right side. So that next piece will line up perfectly, match up both my edges, go to the machine, stitch that 1/4 inch. Take that row and just smooth it out with your hand and finger press. I had the 4.5 inch, so now I need the 6.5 inch for the opposite side. Match up and stitch. This was 22.5 inches, so this will be 24.5 inches. The bulk of the quilt is always going to come to the left-hand side, so you're never going to have all that build up in that little arm of your machine. And just hand press. I now need to start with the 2 darks and then followed by the 2 lights. My next dark piece, 8.5 inches. If you're following the chart, you can always check off the sizes that you've cut or that you've sewn on. Another way to assemble this is to cut all of the fabric first. Sew all of your strips together and then cut all the darks and cut all the lights and just put them in stacks, and that way you're ready to go at the machine. You can take all of your strips and sew them together so you have one really long strip, and from there you can just keep cutting the measurements from the pieces. For example, if I'm going to cut the light squares, I'm going to cut a short and then a long, the next short and the next long, and I'm going to continue cutting the sizes that I need. And I'm going to be able to refer to the measurements on the chart. Once I have the light all cut, I'm going to be able to cut the dark in the same way. I'm going to stack my layers together so that the smallest one is up at the top and the largest one is at the bottom. Now they're very long pieces, so I'm going to have some of the pieces folded or they're just going to be too much on a counter. It still needs to be stitched together the same way. You're going to be stitching as you go around, and you're just going to continue going all the way around. Either way of cutting the strips and putting them together are going to be fine. You can cut each strip as you go around, or you can cut them all in advance. And as we add rounds, the quilt's going to get bigger and bigger. It's always going to stay that rectangular shape because we started with those long rectangular shapes in the center. Normally, when we do a log cabin, we start with a square and we build around that square, so that square is more of a square shape. By those long pieces, it gives us a rectangle, which is a little bit more bed-friendly because it's going to fit on that bed a lot better. There are a lot of different ways you can do a color variation on this. If you sew all of your strips together and randomly mix dark and light together, it's going to have that log cabin feel because you're still going to go around, but you won't have a light or a dark side. Another variation would be doing the 2 ends light or dark, and then the 2 sides the opposing. So you're going to have a light and a light and a dark and a dark. It's going to give that quilt a different feeling. This quilt was made with 40 light strips and 40 dark strips. And it does equal 73 inches by 90 inches. Now your size is going to be a little bit different depending on how many strips you're going to be able to add on. And you can continue to make this bigger and bigger. You can make this big enough to do an entire queen size quilt. If you want one to do a king size quilts are square, so you're going to need to start with the square in the center and then go around. This is a lot of fun to make because we just get to keep sewing around and around and around. Having them cut to the exact size means we don't need to stop, press, and trim off those corners. We just keep going until we're done, finger pressing as we go along, and when we're done, we can give that a nice final press, and we're done. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.